Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Fundamentals for the Future of Work. My name is Eric Wallace with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, then we'll turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, we'd like to thank Workday and Deloitte for their partnership with today's event. They've been wonderful partners to Argyle, and they're committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. Thank you again to Workday and Deloitte. We appreciate your joining us today. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us at Argyle Exec Forum. Also be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I also wanted to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you, so please submit all questions that come up during today's event into the chat section of the interface. Following the discussion, we've set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Now, without further delay, let's get started. Today, we are joined by Josh Tarr, who is Senior Principal Talent and Technology at Workday, and Janine Zucker, who is Chief Commercial Officer at Deloitte. Welcome, Josh and Janine. Let's begin. In today's webinar, we'll focus on content related to Deloitte's 2023 Human Capital Trends Report, along with Workday's coinciding point of view. If the past century of work was based on the view that work was fixed and repeatable, the next century will be based on the view that work is fluid and agile. The boundaries that once dictated when, where, and how work was completed are falling away, shaken up by advancing technologies and greater discontinuity and disruption. In this year's Global Human Capital Trends Report, Deloitte introduced a set of new fundamentals for a boundaryless world to address the key shifts that have transformed the world of work. For those who successfully navigate these shifts, the boundaryless world becomes one of infinite possibility instead of chaos and confusion. Deloitte surveyed over 10,000 professionals across global business and HR organizations from 105 countries to hear from real people like yourself about what's top of mind when it comes to work, the workplace, and the workforce. 23% of those surveyed were board and C-suite members. This survey data is complemented by interviews with leaders in various industries to provide a truly global, cross-industry representation of these trends. So what did Deloitte find? The greatest barrier to achieving organizational outcomes is being overwhelmed by too many changes at once. But the dissolution of the boundaries we once assumed to be fixed is creating new opportunities for organizations and workers who are prepared to show up in fundamentally different ways. New fundamentals must be built to help workers and organizations navigate this boundaryless world. These new fundamentals require organizations to think like a researcher and frame business challenges as an experiment from which organizations can learn, adapt, and improve to expedite impact and generate new insights. Workers and organizations must work together to co-create the new rules of their working relationship, including greater worker influence and accountability for societal outcomes. Prioritizing human outcomes calls on organizations to create impact beyond their business. Organizations must focus on creating a clear collective purpose. Deploying these new fundamentals requires organizations and workers to employ new mindsets, letting go of the work, workforce, and workplace operating models of the past to embrace a more fluid and more human future, focused on speed, agility, experimentation, and innovation. Each of these fundamentals comprises 3 trends. Today, we'd like to focus on 4 of the trends. Throughout this webinar, you'll learn ways to define and value work based on skills, how to use technological interventions and nudges to make workers better, how to adopt a workforce ecosystem mindset, and ways to reorient to DEI outcomes over DEI activities. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Today, we're joined by Janine Zucker, Chief Commercial Officer for the Workday Alliance at Deloitte, and Josh Tarr, a Senior Principal in Talent and Technology at Workday. I'll pass the floor over to Janine for a brief introduction and her background in the human capital space.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Janine Zucker, and I am Deloitte's Global Workday Leader. For the past 25 years, I've helped companies transform all aspects of their workforce, everything from the upfront strategy to the people, processes, and technologies. I'm really excited to be here with Josh today.
Thanks so much, Janine. Good to be here with you and Eric, too. So I'm Josh Tarr, based here in beautiful Charlotte, North Carolina in the US. I've been a career HR practitioner, so leading different HR COEs, from HR business partners to talent management, and a lot in between. For Workday, I get to do something really different and exciting, which is to look after our skills first talent strategy as we transform into a skill-based organization. And that's what we're going to dive into with this first trend. So the first trend in this fundamental is navigating the end of jobs. Now, this could sound a bit nerve-producing, but it's actually a really exciting way to rethink work. So traditionally, the job was the defining structure for organizing every aspect of work. A job posting, a job description, a job title. Humans literally box into a square on an org chart. But that approach just no longer makes sense in today's boundaryless world, and executives and workers agree. So Deloitte's skill-based organization survey data shows that only 19% of business executives and 23% of workers say work is best structured through jobs. So instead, organizations are adopting a skill-based approach to help their workforces thrive. The reality is that most organizations are at the very start of this skills journey. So nearly all, so 93% of respondents said moving away from a focus on jobs is important to their organization's success, but only 20% believe that they're ready to tackle this challenge. The early data shows promise, though, with organizations who have moved to a skills-first approach showing gains in innovation and agility. So the question becomes, how can organizations close this readiness gap? So there are three key ways. The first is defining work based on skills. So moving to skills requires organizational and cultural change. To go from defining work as a job to defining work based on the skills it takes to accomplish work. The second is to collect and analyze data on worker skills. Skills work is data work. What skills exist in the organization and what skills are needed in the future are the key questions that organizations are going to need to answer. And fortunately, because we have so much technology advancement, we can see this kind of data and then supplement it with other important information about workers, like their interests, their values, and their career aspirations. The third key is to start making decisions based on skills. The work of moving to a skill-based organization is to redesign the talent practices across the employee lifecycle and making skills a focal point. From hiring to career mobility to performance to rewards, skills becomes the center of talent strategy. Now, the magic of skills is that it matches demand, so what an organization needs, to supply the skills that workers have, so that workers can deliver outcomes based on their skills, their interests, and their potential, not just by their past credentials or their job history. And in the end, the right workers with the right skills are on the right organizational priorities, spending time doing what they're best at.
So let's dig into these questions a little bit deeper with a question. And that question is, what advice would you provide organizations that are struggling to get started with organizing work around skills instead of job titles?
Eric, I'll get started with that. Our job titles have not been evolving as quickly as the skills have been. I mean, take a job title that existed 5 years ago that still exists today. If you think about the skills required to do that job, they've evolved. They've evolved because of AI, because of machine learning, and just the ever-changing landscape overall. If you're looking at a job title, you're not going to be able to match the skills to those positive outcomes if you're only focused on the title.
Such a good point, Janine. I'll dive into. So we think it's really important to start with a business problem. So that problem might be improving diversity of the candidate talent pool or increasing internal mobility. The question then becomes, how can skills help solve that problem? And by grounding the work in the challenges that business teams are facing each day, it gives clear outcomes to the work of skills. And it also helps a great deal with organizational buy-in.
Thank you. Let's continue our conversation with Janine.
Thank you. Well, the next trend is one of the fundamentals around powering the human impact with technology. New workforce technologies are emerging constantly. And if you think about it, there's new technologies that are coming out every day that augment the workforce and the workers. But it's not only helping them improve just from a personal perspective, it's also thinking about how do we use this for teaming capabilities and to be able to drive better outcomes. Let's go on to the next page. And let's check out some of what the trends are saying. So while 93% of business executives believe that using technology to improve outcomes and performance is important, only 22% of organizations are ready to do so. So these companies are not taking in at a fast enough pace all the technology that's out there, or not sure how to use all of them to be able to drive these outcomes and to recognize the importance of developing the capabilities. With 42% of our respondents saying that they know they need to nudge, right, the teams to be able to use the technology in different ways. But as you can see here, companies aren't sure and ready how to do that. So how can we close this gap? Well, we have to enable technology to work on the worker and with the teams. We have to harness these technologies and help people try them, right? We talk about agility. People are learning different ways. We're going to hit on that in some of the other trends. We have to use interventions and nudges constantly to see what's working, what's not. Let's try it. Let's learn from each other and learn from leading practices and what others are using. And let's scale the insights for greater impact. There's a lot of data out there and a lot of data exhaust from all the new technology. We have to continue to look at what's going to be able to drive the greatest outcomes at scale. Realizing the value from new work outcomes requires organizations to move away from outdated views of technology. Right? We have to take this in more and more and see how do we advance the technologies and not just look at it only from a productivity enhancer. How can we use it to enhance human and teams? And how do we look at leveraging that as a power to enable the workforce overall?
Great, thank you. Let's discuss this a little further with the next question, which is, what's the biggest mistake you've seen companies make in trying to build a set of technological interventions and nudges to make work and workers better? Janine, do you want to start off on this?
Sure. I think the biggest mistake is that a training is going to prepare the workforce for working in different ways and working for the technologies. It should be more like train, try, train, try. And some people need hands-on training, right? So we have to think about different ways to ingest the technologies and how to learn from it. Thinking that one training is going to change the way people work is one of the biggest mistakes I've been seeing.
Great, thank you. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I gotta say, Janine, I really like that train, try, train, try. That's really useful. One of the mistakes that we see frequently is organizations not having the pulse on their workforce because they're listening too infrequently. So the pace of work and how complex it is and the pressures that many of us face outside of work are constant, it can feel like. So that makes the idea of having an annual engagement survey or a twice a year listening intervention just feel way out of date. I know at Workday, we use our Peakon employee listening platform to send out a weekly pulse check through this 5-question survey that takes only 2 minutes to complete, but it enables this continuous flow of feedback from our workmates and lets our managers have a much better pulse on what's going on with their teams. And as an organization, we use this frequent key information to make really important decisions for our company.
Josh, I think that's so important what you said. That continuous listening, learning, engagement is so important. If you look at our trends overall, societal impact, what's happening in the market, all of that has an impact. And if you're just surveying on a yearly or twice a year, you're really not going to understand how that's having an impact on the workforce overall. So big fan of Peakon and how we're seeing that being used in the market.
Yeah, thanks. That's a terrific point.
Great, thank you both. Josh, let's continue the conversation with you.
Great. So the next fundamental is all about the workforce ecosystem. So in a boundaryless world of work, relationships are what's most critical. So one of the trends in co-creating this relationship between an organization and workers is unlocking the workforce ecosystem. The organizations are increasingly relying on non-traditional workers for skills and activities that are really high value and strategically important. Yet workforce strategies and practices are still designed around the idea of traditional workers. The shift towards non-traditional work models is being fueled by multiple factors. One is changing workforce dynamics. These are things like rising worker agency, the need for increased agility, and also generational preferences. The second category is changing organizational dynamics, like the rise of digital technology, non-traditional workplaces, and the shift to skills-based organizations. Deloitte survey data revealed that 84% of business leaders recognize the importance of managing different types of workers effectively, but only 16% believe that they're ready to do so. So how do companies start closing this readiness gap? One key is by finding better ways to integrate non-traditional workers into workforces and cultures. And this lets organizations expand their access to talent and also improve the ability to scale up or scale down and shift the focus more rapidly in responses to macro changes and marketplace dynamics. And survey data confirms that the top two drivers to optimize the workforce ecosystem are, one, the ability to meet the current demand, and then secondly, to provide agility for the future. So steps that organizations can take. These include having an ecosystem mindset and also an open workforce platform. Also, by taking a skills approach. These three things enable the boundaries from the traditional workforce model to be removed and enables leaders to maximize the contributions of every worker, regardless of the type of work arrangement that they have.
Great, so let's discuss this in a little more depth. The next question is, what does it mean in practice to adopt a workforce ecosystem mindset? What actions does that involve?
Eric, I'll start. It's interesting when we talk about the mindset. A lot of people think about what they could do within the four walls of their company. And I challenge, if we're going to change the mindset, we really need to be thinking also outside of the organizations. Just think, I know how important health equity is to Workday, right? And as a technology company, but also if you think about the impact of having those conversations with healthcare companies, with government agencies, we actually think about just outside of the four walls of our company and the impact that we can make with the ecosystem coming together, we're going to make huge strides from a societal perspective. And that's what the workforce is looking for, right? That's what our trends are telling us.
Yeah, it's such a good perspective, Janine, to have that macro point of view. I'll talk about the inside the four walls point of view, and this is really all about thinking of the resources within a company in a much different way, and that's how mindsets start to shift as well. So for us, having a workforce eco mindset really allows our business to get work done in a much more inclusive way, with much more agility and also with much more flexibility. A good example of this, at Workday, we have a thriving gig program where thousands of workmates have taken on short-term assignments while in their current roles. And for our workmates, this enables skill growth and new experiences. For our business teams, this expands the talent pool of the very talented workmates to work on really meaningful business objectives. And ultimately, this creates a more upskilled, more agile workforce.
Great, thank you. Janine, let's continue our conversation with you, please.
Great. So let's dive into the fundamental around prioritizing human outcomes. I want to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is incredibly important, to us at Deloitte, and I know to Workday too. And the trend here is really about taking bold action for equitable outcomes. And outcomes is the key word here. DEI progress demands typically have focused on activities and measuring activities and efforts. And we need to see a change to more focusing on outcomes. In the last 2 years, there have been over 1,000 commitments publicly made around DEI and over $210 billion in initiatives. And I bet that number is actually way higher. Now, when we look at the data, 86% of leaders say they're embedding DEI in their ways of working. But only 25% say they're ready to address the issue. And so are all the activities and all of the effort that's being put in really driving the measurable outcomes that we're expecting to see? Organizations are facing challenges around DEI. There's so much emphasis on the activities and not enough on the equitable outcomes. There's more focus on the individual versus solving for the system. There's so much data out there. And so we're really looking at the right data to track the right results and outcomes. And then there's just a disconnect when we look at what the outcomes are of the business and when we look at their innovation and that direct connection with DEI, which could be so powerful in driving those business and innovation outcomes. Delivering meaningful and equitable outcomes requires a well-crafted DEI strategy and implementation of that. You need buy-in from leadership and at every single level. And it needs to be supported by financial resources and dedicating full-time workers across the organization to this. Transparency and clarity is also really important. I think about what we did from a Deloitte perspective. We put out our DEI transparency report. We put it out there with the outcomes that we're looking for to hold ourselves accountable. Transparency is so important here. Instead of talking about what are just the actions that we're taking, we're talking about how are those actions driving results. Sharing the why and the how helps build trust and enhances the workforce engagement, making everyone in the organization part of the DEI journey.
Great, let's dig into this DEI question in a little more detail. So the question is, what specifically does it mean in practice to reorient your DEI efforts to outcomes over activities? Can you shed some light on that, please?
So I'll take that one. I actually think it's the transparency overall. You need to engage with the workforce and you need to put out there what the expectations are and the outcomes that you're driving to. And you also just need to look at it and say, if these actions are not driving to these results, then make changes. I think companies are, not used to looking at it and saying, we're not moving the needle in the way that we want to. Let's do something different. And I think by putting it out there and engaging with the workforce in the ways to be able to move the needle, going back to the Pecan conversation and that regular interaction and regular engagement, that's the way we're going to be able to do this. And it also ties to the ecosystem. Let's also look at how we can make more societal impacts overall with working with the ecosystem overall.
Great, thank you. So let's change the channel a little bit and take some additional questions from the audience. The first of which is, do you think we're ever going to be able to get knowledge workers back into the office full time? Who wants to start us off with that one?
Yeah, I can. It's a big question. There's no doubt that one of the lasting remnants of the pandemic is hybrid and remote work. Now, of course, this is a company decision, and we've seen plenty of companies take the approach that suits them best. But I think it's unlikely that we'll ever return to the pre-pandemic environment, and instead, companies are really going to try to and need to crack the code on flexible work arrangements. And there's just massive value to doing this and unlocking the benefits of both, where there are times where it's just extremely valuable for in-person collaboration, culture building, and just the social connection from being together. And there's also a lot of value for the autonomy, the flexibility, and the focus that working remotely can bring. So, it becomes this both and situation where I think it unlocks the value for companies and workers.
I could not agree more. And that's what the research is showing. Research is showing that the workforce wants guidance, and then they want the flexibility to work within that guidance. And that's exactly what you're saying, right? It's how do you provide that guidance of when it's meaningful to work together, right? And give the teams the flexibility on how they're going to be able to drive the best outcomes, make the human connections, focus on that continuous learning in a way that's going to be beneficial for the organization.
Yeah, yep, that's right.
Thank you. Our next question is, what changes do you think are coming to the workplace over the next 2 years? Josh, can you lead us off on this one, please?
Yeah, sure. One that's really interesting and to me these days is the impact of longer lifespans on work. So as lifespans and folks live longer, this idea of the 40-year career changes to possibly a 60-year career. So starting work in your 20s and retiring in your 60s was the construct. But with people living longer, there's a need, and for some a want, to work past that traditional retirement age. And this just has huge impact. This has huge impact on the availability of talent pools, the dynamics between generations within the workplace. So there's great potential here, from leveraging more gig type work to experienced workers, helping to just bolster this really big need for mentorship and sponsorship and the need for great managers in the workplace. And I think this just ties back to this overall theme we've been talking about here with boundary spanning. Boundary spanning is just all about finding ways to relate to each other in different ways and bringing about our human connection. And so this changing of the dynamics and the demographics of work is certainly going to provide a boundary spanning opportunity.
I love that. As I was thinking about this question, I kind of felt like, how can we not have a conversation about generative AI and the impact that that's going to have? So I would probably say, I would take this question and talk about that and how generative AI is augmenting work, allowing people to do higher value work. And we have to look at how to embrace generative AI and the impact that's going to have. If we go back to past 10 years, technology disruption has been constant, right? And we've continued to embrace it. Everybody thought machines were going to take over people would have no jobs. It actually created more jobs, right? And it goes back to creating new skills for people to continue to evolve and work in different ways. And I think that that's what's going to be continuing to happen as we look ahead. Generative AI is going to have that positive impact on changing work and the way that work is done and unleashing the workforce in different ways as we think about the future.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Josh and Janine, for that insightful session. This concludes today's webinar, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this excellent virtual event. And thank you again to our partners, Workday and Deloitte, and enjoy the rest of your day.